So the lightweight division needs some matchmaking. There's so many different options that not only the fans want, but also the UFC. And there's also some fights the UFC doesn't want, like Arman Tsaruykan getting a title shot, which I kind of disagree with at this point. So regarding the champion, Islam Makhachev, we've heard about his team talking about how they're not as interested in fighting Ilia Topuria. They want him to get a big win at lightweight first before fighting for the title, which I completely understand. The Ilia fight is the biggest in the division, but Islam's team seems to not want to fight Ilia Topuria right now. They want to see him earn that shot in the lightweight division first. But first, before them, from the same source, Ilia Topuria said that he doesn't want to fight Arman Tsaruykan. Everybody wants a title shot. Charles Oliveira said multiple times that he wants a title shot next against Islam and has expressed that he doesn't care to fight Ilia Topuria right now. Justin Gaethje said he also wants a title shot. Everyone wants a title shot. The only one that obviously seems okay with fighting someone else is Arman Tsaruykan because he knows where he stands with the UFC after pulling out. So lightweight is in a complete mess. There's some insane fights you could put together. And I think all of these guys will fight each other, right? Islam will fight anybody. Ilia will fight anybody. Arman, Gaethje, Charles, I think they would all fight anybody. But they're all in the negotiation battles. That's the main fight right now. Who's going to get the title shot? And once that guy gets it, then we're going to see the other lightweights start fighting each other. And the lightweight is getting very close to that transitional phase where the Dustins, Justins, Charles, Chandlers, like these guys are going to retire soon. So we got to get some of the biggest fights possible in that division right now, but fights that make sense. Okay, so the way I would matchmake the lightweight division, Islam Makhachev has three opponents. Two of them that we want, but there is a third opponent that could be next for Islam. So of course there's the Ilia Topuria fight. It's the biggest fight in the division, one of the biggest fights in the UFC regardless of weight classes. And it's against the opponent that has the best chance of beating it. I think Ilia has the best style and the best finishing ability to beat someone like Islam, right? Better than Charles, Arman, Gaethje, Dustin, it doesn't matter. Ilia is the best, most dangerous fight for Islam Makhachev. From distance, Islam can land some good shots. He has the wrestling advantage. We have seen Ilia get taken down before. Now, that doesn't mean that Islam's going to take him down just because Bryce Mitchell did, right? That's MMA math. But if you look at the techniques, Islam could shoot a takedown under some of the swaying head movement or maybe some of the big punches that Ilia throws forward. A good double leg gets Ilia to the ground, and I think on the ground, Islam is better. Of course, there's the left high kick, the left-hand counter punch on the back foot, but if Ilia Topuria is able to get in close on Islam, if he gets right in there, in boxing range, what does Islam do there? That is the most dangerous position any fighter at lightweight can have against someone like Islam. It's Ilia's pocket boxing. If he's able to get in that short range, I don't know if Islam has the skills to counter that. He probably does, but he just never really has been put in that position before against someone who's that powerful and that good at boxing, right? Volk was able to get in there, but actually Volk got dropped in the pocket, right? So Islam does have abilities there that might even surprise Ilia. We have no idea. That's why it's such a compelling fight. That's why it's the fight everybody wants to see. It's between two of the best fighters in the world. If you think Ilia's above John Jones pound for pound, right? Then it would be number one versus number two, but technically it's number one versus number three. And if Islam is able to beat Ilia, it means he beat a former number one pound for pound fighter, Volk, beat him twice. He beat the number three pound for pound fighter, Charles Oliveira, and then beats another number three pound for pound fighter in Ilia Topuria. That's another accomplishment that no other fighter has ever done. And that would tie Anderson Silva's longest win streak in UFC history. A win over Ilia Topuria would have to put Islam in the top 5, 100%. Top 5 GOAT of the sport, no debate whatsoever. But if Ilia wins, I don't know how to think about that because he would only have 5 ranked wins in his entire career. But 3 of those are Volk, Max, and Islam at a higher weight class. He'd be speedrunning the UFC. But that's not his only opponent. The other one is Arman Tsaruykan. Now, this is the opponent. If Islam would rather fight someone else, it should be Arman then. Because, okay, there is the pulling out. He did get injured. I don't know what he was doing the day before. On weigh-in day, he injured his back somehow. I don't know how. But at the same time, he is the number 1 contender. And there's no other lightweight that should get a title shot over him. The only one that could is Ilia. But if it's not Ilia, then it has to be Arman. You can't put Charles, Max, Gaethje, Dustin, or any of these guys above him. I say because of the state of the lightweight division right now, just give it to Arman if Ilia doesn't get the title shot. And have a fighter ready to replace. Like, if Arman gets injured, they can have Gaethje as the backup fighter. Or they can have Ilia Topuria on the card versus someone. And if Arman ever pulls out, they have that fight ready to bump one of those guys up to fight Islam Makhachev. They could do either of those things, right? I think when Arman first pulled out and the UFC did not have a backup fighter was kind of a mistake. They should always have a backup fighter for championship fights. It's too much to risk one of those guys pulling out. But I think the fight is good. It's not the most compelling. Like, I don't think it gets the fans the most excited for it. Everyone knows it's going to be competitive, but it's a competitive kind of fight where you don't really see Arman winning. It's always going to be back and forth. But it seems like it will always be Islam who's one step ahead. And the main reason for that is Arman has the wrestling, right? He may be the best wrestler in the lightweight division, somewhere around the same skill level as Islam's wrestling, but Islam's the better striker of the two. He's way better in the stand-up. It's not really that close either. Arman throws overhands, he has good kicks and stuff, but he's not like super technical to handle someone like Islam on the feet. You know, he would have to wrestle. It'll make it competitive. It'll go back and forth in the wrestling, but the striking advantage for Islam, and maybe going for some submissions, would win him the fight on the scorecards. So it's a good fight, but not the most exciting for everybody. I think, now the third opponent, I think Justin Gaethje is the only other guy that could fight Islam at the moment, if it's not those two. The only people that want Justin Gaethje to fight Islam are Islam's camp and Gaethje's camp, and some of those guys are mutual. Some of the guys in Islam's camp is also in Gaethje's camp. Ali Abdelaziz wants to double dip in the money there, take some money from both the fighters in the main event in the championship fight. It's a no-brainer why Ali Abdelaziz wants that fight. And the thing is, Dana even talked about it. Dana said the fight could be Gaethje, right? Gaethje is one of the top-ranked guys. He beat Fiziev. They don't want to put Arman in there. They might think it's too soon for Ilia, but it's the ranked fighter that we just don't care about. Like, dude, it's going to be a first or second round submission. He's coming off a win against Fiziev. 2 fights before, yes, he knocked out Dustin Poirier, but it's not too different than when Dustin had a title shot against Islam. And remember back then, a lot of the fans didn't care about it until the fight happened, and it was an actual really good fight. I don't think Gaethje could put on the same kind of fight, though. We said the same thing for Dustin, but Gaethje legitimately has no jiu-jitsu. When he's on the ground, he literally fights like a wrestler. He gives up his back, he gives up his neck. Dustin at least has a background in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Even though he's not the best at it, he understands it at a decent level. Decent enough of a level to not get submitted by Islam, right? Fiziev took down Justin Gaethje, a guy who's known for his Muay Thai, not his wrestling. Took down Justin Gaethje and got him an inverted triangle choke. Dude, the fight after, we're going to see Gaethje fight Islam. Not only on the ground does Islam absolutely dominate Justin Gaethje, is it crazy to say that he would outstrike Gaethje because of the takedown threat? Like, how is Gaethje going to fight that? Is he going to move forward, get very aggressive? Well, not only are the takedowns going to be open under some of those big punches for Islam, but also the counter shots. Islam's striking style is more as a counter striker. So Gaethje would be attacking Islam where he's at his strongest in the striking, as well as open up takedown opportunities at the same time. But let's say Gaethje fights the opposite. Let's say he moves away, right? He moves along the cage, or he wants to try to stay in the center of the octagon or something like that. Or maybe even how we fought Khabib. Create space, look for the big openings, but you know that fight's going to be mimicking the Khabib fight. You move too far back to the cage, Islam's going to shoot on it, trip you off of the cage onto the ground, and then submit you. Gaethje could try to keep it in the center. I don't think any of it works, man. I just don't think he has the style and the skills currently to beat someone like Islam Makhachev. The only interesting part of it is that, Gaethje could knock him out just like anybody else can, right? Anybody can knock out Islam. Is that the only reason? Like, what does he actually do technically that you would say, he actually has a good chance at beating Islam like this? I don't know any way he can do that. I could think of ways Ilia beats him. I could think of ways Arman can even beat him. I could think of ways Charles Oliveira can beat him. It's hard to think of Gaethje unless he just brawls and just happens to land a punch, puncher's chance knockout. Some fighters have a greater puncher's chance than others, but if that's the only reason to get excited for it, a puncher's chance being the main reason the challenge is exciting is not enough for a title fight, unless it's heavyweight, right? It's not the same thing at lightweight. Puncher's chance is like the main selling point. We want to see the best fight the best. So those are the only 3 fights for Islam Makhachev. It's either Ilia Topuria, Arman Tsaruykan, or Justin Gaethje. Now, what about Charles Oliveira? I don't think you can give it to Charles. If you don't give it to Arman, you can't give it to Charles. It's just not right. He lost to Arman. Now, if Charles knocks out someone else, like Ilia Topuria or Justin Gaethje, okay, that's a different story. Arman's going to be fighting somebody. I think they're going to be fighting around the same amount of times. So when Charles gets a fight, then Arman will as well. It could even be against each other. So the options for Arman Tsaruykan, of course, we talked about the title fight, but there is also Charles Oliveira. The rematch would be excellent. The first fight should have been 5 rounds, man. It felt just incomplete. 3 rounds are over. Arman Tsaruykan won the decision, but it felt like there should have been 2 more rounds. The fight is not done. I think in a rematch, making it 5 rounds, maybe on the same card as Islam, whoever he fights, would be great. It's a competitive fight. Charles is getting better. We haven't seen Arman since that fight. Charles is now stronger than ever before. He's bigger as well. You saw that in the Chandler fight. Taking Chandler down multiple times, overpowering him in moments was kind of crazy. Like, you never expected Charles Oliveira to be able to do that to someone like Michael Chandler. Not only that, still a very good striker, still amazing on the ground. Charles Oliveira is better than he's ever been. And if he fights Arman now, he could win, right? If it makes the wrestling a lot more difficult for Arman, I think Charles doesn't have to respect it as much, right? He can let loose in the striking a lot more. I think Charles Charles could win the fight, but it's like nearly 50-50. Either of those guys could win, and the winner of that fight should get a title shot, but there's other opponents as well. There is the potential of Arman Tsaruykan versus Ilia Topuria. That'd be a great fight, and it would test Ilia's wrestling in the heavier weight class. Like, he destroys Arman in the stand-up, right? Knocks out Arman. He's gonna go throwing overhands and power punches with Ilia. He'd get decimated if he tries to fight like that. He would have to kick and wrestle. Maybe throw out a few jabs and keep range, because Arman has a long reach. He's like 5'8" with a 72-inch reach. It's crazy. So you could stick the jab on Ilia and then throw high kicks and stuff like that. Measure for takedowns. He could absolutely beat Ilia Topuria, but Ilia could knock him out as well, right? And we don't know what Ilia's wrestling and jiu-jitsu is going to look like in the heavier weight class. He says he's 187 pounds. I mean, that's a big guy. If he walks around 187 and he's like lean, there's a picture of him. If he looks like that at 187, he's going to be decently sized for that weight class because he didn't look fat. So that's the X factor about Ilia Topuria moving up to 155. I think the striking overall, he would beat Arman, and Arman could out-wrestle him to a decision or something. I don't see them finishing Ilia on the ground. So I think that fight's even as well. But then there's Arman Tsaruykan versus Justin Gaethje. It's like all these guys are going to be fighting each other. Tsaruykan versus Gaethje is a fight where Arman wrestles him, maybe chokes him out, ground and pounds him. That's not a good fight for Justin Gaethje. Arman wouldn't be striking that much. He'd be maybe throwing a few jabs and stuff and then shoot for the takedown under it. Gaethje might explode a few times and defend the takedown, but the chain wrestling from Arman, a lot of those guys in the Caucasus are just so good at it. Pushes him against the fence, takes him down from there. Even though Arman doesn't really go for submissions, Gaethje is so susceptible to chokes and stuff. Like, I think Arman might be able to get his back and choke him out. But if he doesn't do that, the ground and pound will be there. Arman's ground and pound is ferocious. That's where he mostly excels on the ground with. So the wrestlers, grapplers of this division are going to be tough fights for Gaethje. So Islam and Arman. And then we go to Ilia Topuria. So Ilia could fight Islam. He could fight Arman. But the fight I would do is Charles Oliveira, if he's not fighting Islam. Charles Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria is the fight to make. Number one contender fight. They've both been talking about each other. According to Chael Sonnen, Charles Oliveira said he's not that interested in Ilia. And he says that Ilia is talking too much and he needs to respect the weight class. These guys hit harder, all that sort of stuff. Ilia was saying he's the lightweight champion, and I think that's the fight you do, right? I don't know why Charles thinks like he's getting a title shot over everybody, because that's what he's saying. He's saying that he wants to fight for the title, and
I think Ilia and Arman are above him.
He needs another win. Beating Michael Chandler is not enough, and the fight should be Ilia Topuria.
That's a dangerous fight for both guys.
Because not only, of course, Ilia could knock him out. You know, Charles doesn't move his head that much. He's gotten better at it, but is it at the level to dodge the punches of Ilia? I don't think it's that level yet. He could dodge some of the punches of like Beneil Dariush and maybe Michael Chandler. These guys are nowhere near Ilia. You know, Ilia will laser beam him with those punches. But at the same time, Charles could knock out Ilia. This is the one guy that I think has the best chance of knocking Ilia out in some of those exchanges. He has the flying knees. He has the high kicks. He's explosive. He's very aggressive too. He's not going to be moving away from Ilia. He's going to go right at him, right? Maybe the only fighter that will go towards Ilia and throw down. In boxing range, Charles would most likely get knocked out. He has the knees and the elbows and stuff, but the higher chances Ilia lands that clean shot and knocks him out. In mid to long range, that's where Charles has an advantage. He has the leg kicks, as Ilia has that low boxing stance. It's heavy on the lead leg, open for a leg kick right there. That could come up high later, or maybe the knees. There's a lot of good techniques from Charles Oliveira to win that fight. And if the fight goes to the ground, not only if Ilia takes it to the ground, I don't think he would, but if Charles takes the fight to the ground, with how much better his wrestling is, he could be shooting takedowns and win the rounds off of that. Ilia is very good on the ground. I don't think he gets submitted, but Charles is so good with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he doesn't need to get a submission. When you're that high level on grappling, you're not just good at submissions, you're good at top position, top control, all of that stuff. We saw that in the Chandler fight. Chandler is bigger, stronger, and more explosive, and a better wrestler than Ilia Topuria. And Charles is able to wrestle him like that. It's MMA math, you know, but still, I think the size difference, with how heavy Ilia throws his punches, there are openings for takedowns under those. And also from the clinch as well. It's very dangerous to get into the clinch with Ilia, right? You get past the boxing range into the clinch. Charles starts throwing elbows, knees, body locks him, picks him up and slams him or something. That's a very, very interesting fight. Who do I think would win? I would say Ilia has a better chance, just because I don't see Charles avoiding all the punches. I think one clean punch from Ilia can knock him out. So I think Ilia has the advantage. He would be the favorite going into it, but it's a very dangerous fight. Now we could talk about Ilia versus Gaethje, but I just don't think that fight happens. If it did, Ilia would destroy him. He could take him down and submit him. Trading with Ilia is not the same as trading with Fiziev, because once Ilia gets into the pocket, he's not leaving it. Gaethje's going to be covering up, hands up to his head, standing there in front of Ilia. He's getting destroyed. That is the worst matchup for Justin Gaethje in the division. There is a chance he can land a high kick. He could land some punches because he's also good in those exchanges as well. He's very powerful and stuff, but the way he defends, the way he likes to stand in front of his opponent sometimes, especially shown in the Fiziev fights, that is tailor-made tailor-made for Ilia. There's no better way for Ilia to beat someone than a fighter blocking punches like that. So I'll be very confident in Ilia Topuria beating Justin Gaethje.
So then Charles Oliveira.
There is a potential Islam Makhachev title fight. There is also the Arman and Ilia fights, but there is another fight for Charles. Is Max Holloway for the BMF title. Their first fight at featherweight really wasn't a fight. You know, Charles ran his head into a fence, and I don't remember what injury it was, but it was like something with his neck or collarbone. It wasn't even a fight. The rematch would be insane. Now, I do think Charles would beat him. I think Charles hits harder. I think his wrestling could be a big difference in that fight, right? Justin Gaethje wasn't really shooting takedowns against Max. Charles would be exchanging in the striking. He's going to be one moving forward, pressuring Max to the fence, and shooting takedowns. I think it's a tough fight for Max. I think whenever the fight's in neutral, Max has the advantage. But as soon as Charles starts moving forward, his advantage increases with every step forward. Max could land a back step overhand like he did against Korean Zombie, because Charles sometimes does move in straight lines like that without moving his head. So he could eat a big overhand or something, but I think Charles would be a lot smarter in that. I think the wrestling just makes it a lot more, one-sided is not the right word, but it makes the fight a lot easier for Charles, right? Charles is bigger than him. He hits harder than him. He has better wrestling. He has better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He has a 5-inch reach advantage. He has a pressure advantage. He's better at using the fence. Max, I would say, is a more technical striker, but then we don't know where his chin is at, right? He got knocked out for the first time against Ilia. He also got dropped by Justin Gaethje. Those are 2 fights in a row where he got hurt. I think it's a great fight, but I do favor Charles. It could also be the next fight. But when we talk about Justin Gaethje, so there's the Islam, Arman, and Ilia fights. I think there's also Dan Hooker. So that was the original fight before Fiziev. And they could reschedule it. You know, Dan Hooker is on a good win streak. He deserves a fight in the top 5. I think Justin Gaethje is maybe the perfect opponent. It was a fight that a lot of people were going back and forth with, like, you know, Justin might win. He has a power advantage there, but Dan Hooker has the volume and he doesn't go away. He's very durable. He can overwhelm Justin Gaethje after taking some of his biggest punches. That's an absolute war of a fight. That is the most exciting fight for Justin Gaethje. That's the fight you do. And as an early prediction, I don't know, man. I think Gaethje would win now that we know he's still good after the Fiziev fight, because leading into the Hooker fight, I think Hooker was a favorite because
We didn't know if Gaethje could take a decent shot after the Max Holloway fight.
I mean, he got knocked out brutally, you know, but he looked great against Fiziev. So I think that fight has become a 50-50 fight even. That's the fight you do next. Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker. And then we talk about Max Holloway. So he could fight Justin Gaethje, he could fight Charles Oliveira, or he could fight Dustin Poirier. That could be Dustin's retirement fight. I talked about it before. They did fight twice and Dustin beat him both times, but Max now would be a better fight for Dustin Poirier. I think it's a close fight as well. Maybe Dustin has the advantage. He's a better boxer. Max doesn't really go for takedowns that much. I don't think he could really wrestle with Dustin that well, but he does have openings for some of his combinations and stuff. I think the power punching advantage from Dustin combined with his better boxing skill will win a lot of the exchanges, or at least neutralize what Max is working with, right? If Max wants to string together a combination, one shot from Dustin can completely dispel all of that. Just break the entire combination. And Max may be the least durable he's ever been after the Ilia and Gaethje fights, whereas Dustin's very durable. He went through a war with Islam Makhachev. Didn't even get dropped once.
Islam's not the biggest puncher, but he landed knees on the chin and a ton of punches throughout 4.5 rounds.
That's a great fight. Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier. That's the fight I would do next. I don't see any other retirement fight for Dustin unless it's like him going up to welterweight maybe, but I don't know who he wants to fight up there. I think Dan Hooker should fight Justin Gaethje. The only other fight that makes somewhat sense is Max Holloway. Max Holloway versus Dan Hooker would be pretty cool. It's not a great stylistic matchup for Dan Hooker. It'd be a kind of fight that would make Max look really good. He can show his striking capabilities on display against a guy who could just take all of it, right? Because Max isn't really looking to knock you out with every shot. And that's what kind of throws a lot of guys off when they're fighting Dan Hooker. They're trying to knock him out and they leave openings because of how much power they're throwing. Max will put together combinations like 70% power, and Dan Hooker would just be missing a lot of his shots. I think it'll look almost like the Kelvin Kattar fight, except Hooker will be throwing forward, and I think Holloway will be slipping a lot of them. For Michael Chandler, he is fighting Paddy Pimblett. They could do Matuesz Gamrot versus Renato Moicano. That'd be a cool fight. None of the other fights make as much sense. I mean, they could do Bahamondes, but that's a big step up. For Beneil Dariush, they could do him versus Renato Moicano, Grand Dawson, or Bahamondes. Any of those fights make sense. I mean, the Bahamondes fight is also a big step up, but I guess that makes more sense than fighting Gamrot. For Moicano, he could fight Gamrot, Dariush. Paddy Pimblett is fighting Michael Chandler. Benoit Saint-Denis is fighting Yoel Alvarez. Grand Dawson could fight Ignacio Bahamondes. That'd be a good fight. Yeah, that's probably the fight I would do between those two. And that's how you match up the lightweight division, which really needs it right now. Those guys are not fighting. And leave the comments below. How would you guys match make the lightweight division? And I'll see you guys in the next video.